Welcome to Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. Today we have truly a very distinguished guest and one who will be and is part of our history that gets made very quickly nowadays. And it's Dr. Malone. Dr. Malone is a doctor for many, many years, very distinguished, very accomplished, non-controversial until just a short while ago. And then all of a sudden, the whole world changes. And we're going to find out how, why, and it is terribly relevant to us in probably the most important thing we can do now. What went wrong that helped make the COVID-19 pandemic, I call it the CCP virus pandemic, so much worse than it had to be. And I think a person who can shed much light on that is Dr. Malone. So, Doctor, would you quickly tell us where you were born, your background, medical education, that gets you to the point where you become an expert on this kind of illness?
Early on, I was a carpenter and a farmhand in the Central Coast of California. So I also have agricultural and kind of hands-on labor roots, but chose to go back to school and really didn't want to work in the defense industry and decided to go into medicine. For a period of time, I was a computer science student, but then focused on medicine when I moved to UC Davis and joined the laboratories of Murray Gardner and Bob Cardiff in the Department of Pathology, which is where I was this is 1983 now, really first exposed to retrovirology, molecular biology, working with RNA as well as DNA, learned to purify RNA and work with RNA actually at UC Davis. And while I was there was a series of discoveries at the Primate Center, and eventually I became a Primate Center investigator. So I've worked with non-human primates quite a bit. From Preston Marks, Murray Gardner, and others, that was the first discovery of a retrovirus involved in a immunodeficiency syndrome in non-human primates. Of course, then that was published in Lancet and was followed by the discovery of the AIDS virus by Luc Montagnier, and then the whole...
What was the name of that discovery, the discovery that you're talking about? So we put a name on it.
It was the discovery of the lentivirus or retrovirus basis of immunodeficiency in monkeys. So that's now associated. The modern extension of that is called SAIDS or the simian immunodeficiency virus, and that led to a very active program at UC Davis that is ongoing. That is really one of the early gain-of-function research programs. I got a scholarship to Northwestern University, where I eventually, this is in Chicago, where I eventually graduated with my MD. And halfway through my MD, I took a leave of absence and went to UC San Diego and the Salk Institute because I wanted to work on the use of retroviruses for gene therapy. And the two top laboratories in the world were at UC San Diego, that being Ted Friedman, the original inventor of the idea, and Inder Verma, who had been trained by David Baltimore, the kind of notorious retrovirologist. While I was at the Salk, I think there was 6 or 8 Nobel laureates, including Francis Crick. This is the lab that gave rise to David Baltimore, trained David Baltimore, who got the Nobel Prize. Susumu Tanagawa got the Nobel Prize. Jonas Salk was still there at the time. But based on my advice, Dinko told me directly that he pivoted the program to focus on vaccines. And because I had advised, and that had been kind of one of my insights, that vaccines were a better application for gene therapy technologies. And he pivoted the company to focus on vaccines. It became enormously successful and was sold to Johnson & Johnson as a vaccine company. And that is the technology and the core competency that gave rise to the Janssen adenoviral vector SARS-CoV-2 vaccine that we all are familiar with, that was emergency use authorized here in the United States.
Amazing, amazing. So that goes off on a different track for a while.
But they all come back to the Salk Institute in this critical period of 1986 to 1989. And while I was there, I was, as a graduate student, in an incredibly competitive postdoc lab. All normal ethics are suspended in that kind of environment, much as you see with Tony Fauci and his operations. So an incredibly competitive postdoc lab of 15 or 16 postdocs, one graduate student, me, and I worked on something that I thought was not going to be putting me at risk for competition with the big boys, which was to try to figure out how RNA gets assembled into a retrovirus. And that thread of investigation caused me to do the research, which led to the discovery of how to manufacture large amounts of RNA, how to stabilize it, how to make it so that it can be readily translated in cells, and then the discoveries that enabled the delivery of RNA into cells, and then subsequently in embryos while I was at the Salk, and then a huge patent battle broke out between the Salk and UC San Diego and various professors that all thought they were going to get rich off of my stuff. And I left the Salk with a nervous breakdown and joined a startup company called Vical, carried all my protocols, reagents, et cetera, over. And they set up a skunk works for me. And that's what led to the discoveries of what's called naked RNA and naked DNA, and this set of 9 patents that were all filed in 1989 that describe the logic and demonstration, in other words, reduction to practice from a legal standpoint. You're a lawyer, you understand that. So we did the first reduction to practice of the use of both RNA and DNA for vaccination purposes. I took the methods that I developed and the vectors and everything, made a bunch of RNA, prepared it with the various formulations, the positively charged lipids, the fats, shipped it off to John Wolfe at Wisconsin. They injected it into mice, and that, to our great surprise and a lot of joy, ended up working.
Working in what sense?
In the sense that we were able to detect the expression of the RNA or the DNA in the muscle of the mice, which was a great surprise. So suddenly we had a non-viral gene polynucleotide delivery method that was working in mammals. The levels of protein being produced were so small that they weren't likely to be useful for gene therapy. Plus, I knew from my work at the Salk, this was one of my other big kind of insights, was that gene therapy really wasn't going to work because it was generating an immune response against the foreign gene. So even if you give the child that has muscular dystrophy the correct dystrophin gene, or the child that has cystic fibrosis, the correct cystic fibrosis gene, their immune system doesn't know that it's the good gene. It only knows that it's a different gene. And it will attack the new protein because it's different, even though it is the one that would cure the child. So gene therapy has this fundamental problem that I was perhaps the first to recognize. But in the case of Vical, this is a make lemonade out of lemons story. I recognized that a little bit of protein being made in mouse muscle could be perfectly good for making a vaccine response.
I hesitate to take any interruption at all in this interview with Dr. Malone. I've had so much respect for him. I've had a chance to read everything about him. I've had a chance to watch him, and I've never been able to schedule a podcast with him, and I'm glad I've been able to do it. It occurs to me that there hasn't been a podcast we've done with Patriot Mobile where they don't fit right in. We should do a podcast on them. You know, to fight these battles, you need allies, and we sure don't have too many allies in the corporate community, but we don't need too many when you have Patriot Mobile. Patriot Mobile was there with us in the fight to dignify, to save human life. It was there in the fight to save our right to defend ourselves at a time when we need it more than any other that I can remember. Think of the murders you read about every day, the old people hit in the head, the old people beaten up, the young people beaten up, the big, strong people beaten up by 4 and 5 people. Part of the making us of a communist country is to destroy our economy and hit us with this unbelievable, out-of-control inflation that doesn't have to be. And they are putting together packages for your mobile phone so you can afford it. And when you spend that money, you'll be spending that money to save your way of life for you, for your children, for your grandchildren, and for your friends and their children and grandchildren. Oh my goodness, I was so proud the second time I became mayor of New York, and we inserted in the oath of Athens, used by Fiorello LaGuardia in one of his inaugurations. That's where I found it. And do you know what I pledged in addition to pledging my sacred honor to the Constitution, the laws of America, New York, and New York City? I pledged to make my city greater than it was handed to me. And I did. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to patriotmobile.com/Rudy. patriotmobile.com/Rudy. 972-PATRIOT. And they'll work out a package for you that fits your budget. And if you are a veteran or a first responder, they're going to have plenty of special discounts because you're entitled to them. patriotmobile.com/Rudy. patriotmobile.com/Rudy. 972-PATRIOT. Welcome back to our fascinating interview with Dr. Robert Malone. I think you've learned a lot about what goes on in this very, very complex industry. And that's a nice way to describe it. So we go back to Dr. Robert Malone. And Doctor, I'm going to see if you can focus on, and then if you have to go back and explain, please do. When did you first become aware of this new thing that we call many things, COVID-19? I like to call it, because I'm a smart ass, CCP virus. The pandemic, the thing that caused a worldwide pandemic, unlike anything. When did it first occur to you that something like this was happening?
And just in terms of nomenclature, I think what we could say is we could call it the EcoHealth Alliance Wuhan Institute of Virology virus, and not be too far from the truth. Because that really puts the finger on it seems to be at blame here. I got a phone call from an interesting character named Michael Callahan, Dr. Michael Callahan, who called me from Wuhan on January 4th. Now, fascinatingly, Michael Pottinger called by the public record now. Michael Pottinger, a longtime China hand, then used to report to General Flynn, fluent in Mandarin, used to be a journalist in China, then was detailed, joined the military, joined Marine Corps, reported to Michael Flynn in Afghanistan, and then was promoted to a high-level position in the White House, and was the one responsible for putting Debbie Birx in as director for the vice president's Corona Task Force. Okay, so Pottinger.
Well, let's go to the first gentleman and the first call.
Well, I want to just establish something.
Okay.
I got called from Callahan, Dr. Michael Callahan, on the 4th, alerting me to this novel coronavirus that looked like it was getting out of hand in China. And on the 5th, Pottinger called Bob Redfield and basically told him the same thing. Redfield being the CDC director that you worked for Bob Gallo, just to kind of close that loop. So Callahan had been introduced to me historically as CIA. I had collaborated with him for years. I've co-published with him. I've had, because I'm an expert in the biodefense industry, and have been very involved with DoD and all the agencies, and really the birth of this after the anthrax attacks. I was once interviewed to be the chief scientist at USAMRIID, just to provide a little more context. So I get this space pretty well. So Callahan and I had co-published in the past. Callahan's appointment is at Harvard University. He was apparently in China under the cover of his Harvard appointment. And apparently the CCP were unaware of his intelligence community ties. You can find more about Callahan and really get a good backgrounder on the webpage that is maintained by the website Unlimited Hangout. And the title of the article is DARPA's Man in Wuhan.
Darkest Man in Wuhan.
DARPA's Man in Wuhan.
Gotcha.
So Michael is arguably one of our top experts in the intelligence community on gain-of-function research, and has advised multiple presidents, and is absolutely one of our top experts in biowarfare and biodefense within the intelligence community.
Michael was the first one to call you.
Correct. And he told me that I needed to get my team spun up. Michael and I had worked on Ebola and Zika before. So he told me I needed to get my team spun up again for this novel coronavirus. At the time, I was working on a Defense Threat Reduction Agency Chem Biodefense Group contract to use the latest technology with computers and biorobots to identify drugs that would be useful as countermeasures or treatments for people with organophosphorus-based compound exposure. That is to say, chemical biowarfare agents. So we were working on that using high throughput robots and latest computer technology. And I got that team to pivot.
And where was he in China when he called you?
Yeah, he was in Wuhan. He had apparently been in Wuhan in the fourth quarter of 2019. And just a little background on Michael, then, his subsequent activities. He claims to have treated hundreds of patients while he was in Wuhan. He escaped Wuhan by boat, I'm told, as the quarantine came down. So he was not moving through official channels. And he was then brought to manage the Diamond Princess outbreak.
Where was that?
Japan, the Diamond Princess. Okay, so he managed that. And then was brought back and reported to Bob Kadlec, who was the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the time.
And he was brought back to the U.S.
Correct. Michael then, just one of the many things he did subsequently, but you're a New Yorker. Michael has deep ties with the Northwell Hospital system.
Sure, yeah.
And he was the one that designed and led the deployment of the tent city for treating SARS-CoV-2 patients.
The tent city in Central Park or the one in Queens?
Central Park, I believe.
The one that the Graham people were involved with to some extent, right?
I don't know the details of what went on there. I remember Michael calling me from.
It was across the street from Mount Sinai.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yep, yep.
So, so that's a little backgrounder on Michael, and he continued to be central in the coronavirus response. Just to give a little more background, I called Michael at one point, concerned about the reports that this was an engineered pathogen. This is about February. And he told me, quote, "My people have gone over the sequence in great detail, and there is no evidence of genetic manipulation in this virus." Now, we now know that's a lie.
Wow.
But what I came to know about Michael, one of the things in dealing with CIA agents, and you may or may not have had that pleasure, is they're all trained to lie. They are very, very good liars. That's kind of a selection criteria. And so, in my experience, when you're dealing with the intelligence community, you have to kind of triangulate truth to whatever they say, because most of what they tell you is going to be a misdirection. I'm saying this gently, or normal people would call it a lie. And what you have to do is kind of think through what the lie is protecting or what it's trying to push to you as a message, much like trying to figure out the actual truth when you read the New York Times or the Washington Post.
So when you called him in early February, would it be late February 2020?
Actually, early February, because it was before I got infected. I got infected at the end of February 2020.
You already had some knowledge that it was possibly engineered in the laboratory.
I had been doing deep, detailed sequence analysis and modeling of the virus sequence since it was uploaded as the Wuhan seafood market virus, either January 10th or January 11th. So yes, I was very sure.
And your work suggested that it looked like something produced in the laboratory.
No, I didn't. I noticed that it was highly homologous to specific other isolates of sarbecoviruses, which is this category of a subcategory of coronavirus. But there was a lot of buzz in my network that this had the signs of a engineered virus. And we now know that, in fact, it is identical to one of the prior isolates, with one tiny little specific exception, which is the sequence for the furin cleavage site.
What would that tell you?
It is highly unlikely that a evolution would occur just at that specific site and not be changes in the genetic sequence in the rest of the virus. Highly, highly unlikely.
So it's highly unlikely that this could have occurred only in this particular virus, because it would have occurred in others if it were naturally.
Highly unlikely that a virus would evolve in moving from an animal to a human host and only have one tiny little region that gets changed genetically and not have random mutations in the rest of the virus. It basically, it is highly improbable.
And what was the region that was changed? How do you describe that?
The furin cleavage site?
Yeah.
This is the sequence in the spike protein, which had been known for years to be, if one introduced a furin cleavage site into this protein from other coronaviruses, that it would make them much more highly pathogenic and able to infect much more readily.
So this was the one change that appeared to be genetic. The others all appeared to be laboratory manufactured.
No, the one specific the one specific change that varied in this virus from what appeared to be its predecessor was this introduction of this specific furin cleavage site.
Mm-hmm. And that would be unlikely to have happened only once.
If it had occurred under natural evolution, that change, which has never been known to happen naturally in any other coronavirus, that change would have also been associated with other genetic changes elsewhere in the genome. And those don't exist. In other words, it has all the hallmarks of somebody surgically going in and sticking a furin cleavage site into this using a technology which, by the way, Ralph Baric pioneered, which makes it so that you can do these changes and not have any evidence of the genetic footprint that normal genetic modification technology leaves.
So because of this very big question, you ask Callahan, and Callahan gives, were you surprised when he gave you that answer?
Completely.
I bet.
But he said it with such authority that I didn't think twice about it again. He was basically saying that DARPA and by extension the CIA had carefully examined this virus and had concluded that there was absolutely no evidence that it was genetically modified. We now know that that is not true. So either we're left with the conclusion that either Michael's highly competent, highly funded, and experienced colleagues in the intelligence community are grossly incompetent and unaware of prior literature, or they were lying.
So for us laymen, what he's telling you is this happened in nature, not in the laboratory.
And shut up about it and stop spreading this rumor.
Because it'll look like the Chinese and possibly us were playing around in a dangerous way.
Just so. And we now know the documentation is very clear that this is technology that was developed at North Carolina by Ralph Baric, as were the genetically modified mice that express the ACE2 receptor, and transferred from EcoHealth Alliance in North Carolina and Ralph Baric to Shijin, the bat lady, at Wuhan Institute of Virology. So there was a explicit technology transfer from US and NIAID funded research to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was specifically related to what we now know exists in this specific virus.
Well, this would be a good time to take one more break, and we'll come back and we'll get the doctor's conclusions. Not long ago, Mike Lindell, the inventor of MyPillow, and his team fit me for my very own MyPillow. They also introduced me to their wide assortment of other incredible products, like their mattress topper, their sheets, towels, slippers, and more. Sleep is incredibly important to me, and I can assume for all of you. It's time you give MyPillow a try and see for yourself. Listeners have helped build MyPillow into the incredible company it is today, and Mike Lindell wants to give back to all of you. You can get great discounts on MyPillow products by going to mypillow.com right now and seeing each of the specially priced items, including those in the radio listener special square. You're going to see rotational offers up to 66% off on products like their pillows, mattress topper, Giza sheets, but also new products like their slippers, weighted blankets, robes, and waffle blankets. All MyPillow products come with a 60-day money-back guarantee. Enter promo code Rudy for these great specials. That's MyPillow.com and use the promo code Rudy. Welcome back, and we are going to return to our fascinating interview with Dr. Robert Malone and really have him give us some real explanation of why there's so much resistance to this vaccine. Doctor, you did something that really pretty much shook the world, certainly shook the United States, when you published the document with 170, was it 170? Very, very well-regarded scientists who would know this field intimately, warning people not to take the vaccine. It was 17,000. That's in distinction to a government that was promoting the vaccine, and these are my words, not yours, almost with fascist-like propaganda and fascist-like tactics. Fired from your job if you didn't take it, necessary police officers, medical workers, firefighters, my goodness, necessary military people going to be sacrificed because they wouldn't take a vaccine which really has never been properly tested based on prior vaccines because of the nature of the emergency. But you went beyond the fact that we should have some doubts. You created some real issues. Can you tell us how that came about?
Yeah, and Rudy, of course, you're aware there in New York City that the government is going to mandate firefighters and others to take this new vaccine that is being developed that will not be tested in humans, only in mice.
Well, that's even worse.
So it's the story continues. They're not stopping. And I want to touch on, you used
good point. A good point. Very good point. Well, go ahead.
Use the term fascist. And I think that's a term that's been appropriated and weaponized. And it's useful to go back to what is the truth of the term, the political science term fascism. And fascism is attributed by Benito Mussolini, who would know something about it.
Yes, sir.
As the fusion of the interests of the corporations and the state. Okay, it has nothing to do with tiki torches in Charlottesville and people play acting at being stormtroopers. It is about, the term refers to what we now gently call public-private partnerships. It is the fusion of the interests of the corporations and what we now call the administrative state. That is what fascism is. And it is absolutely what we've been observing. And no surprise, the heavy-handed tactics of censorship and all of the others that you mentioned are being deployed yet again by a fascist organization. And I don't say that to be inflammatory. It is the proper political science term for the close collusion between the interests of large corporations and the interests of the administrative state. And that's what we're observing. So it is the right term. What happened to give rise to this International Alliance of Physicians and Medical Scientists is that a couple of things came together. I had traveled there. We had an invitation from what is labeled as a far-right senator sitting in the Italian Senate. Of course, we know those words now mean nothing. So she's more aligned with Maloney's party, which may well play a key role in the next administration, which, of course, has been attacked in the press, which is largely controlled by the more EU-oriented party that has been mismanaging Italy for decades. But we were invited by an Italian senator to speak in the Senate in Rome. And how could you say no to the opportunity to speak in the Roman Senate? So we traveled there, a group of us physicians from all over the world, including the United States, and had the first international COVID summit in Rome last fall. And the rules of engagement were that we couldn't say anything about vaccines, only about early treatment. And of course, we were resoundingly attacked in the press. And I was accused of being one of the dirty dozen, which is kind of fascinating. They used the same terminology that the president had used against people here in the United States that were dissenters. But in the case of the Italian press, they only identified 10 of us. So apparently in Italy, 10 is a dozen. Good to know. So from the enormous success, we had millions and millions of streaming viewers from that meeting. From that success came the birth of this new organization, this International Alliance of Physicians and Medical Scientists, that is branded as the Global COVID Summit. So you can find that globalcovidsummit.org. And we're now well over 17,000. We have a series of these declarations.
They are all medical doctors? Is that the requirement?
They're all medical physicians and PhD medical scientists. So they're not just any PhD, they're PhDs that are directly involved in medical or hospital care. And
all doctors and PhD medical science who would be involved in hospitals and in care.
Yep, precisely.
So you're one of the people on the line.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very, very sensible. The people who actually day in and day out for 2 years were under tremendous pressure. Are you now censored? Of course.
Of course.
I would like to tell the audience I'm really not that stupid. I'm asking it for their benefit just in case. You are definitely censored.
I was kicked off of Twitter and LinkedIn in a coordinated fashion about 2.5 to 3 days immediately before I was on Rogan, with absolutely no warning. So this, and then I was highly shadow banned before then.
I know that. Yeah.
My name is almost enough to get you deplatformed from Facebook, and I am one of the most highly censored people in the world right now, constantly subjected to that pressure. And I intentionally, after the Dark Horse podcast with Steve Kirsch and Brett Weinstein, in which I first spoke about the risks of the jab and the regulatory problems, I've been censored continuously since then.
Congratulations.
I spoke about my meetings with the FDA, my communication with top officials at the FDA, the myocarditis and other adverse events, reactivation of latent DNA viruses, the irregularities in the non-clinical data package that had been revealed at that point. So basically the failures to follow normal procedures and guidance in developing and licensing these vaccines. And particularly, I spoke about that the spike protein in terms of what the fact checkers responded to. I used the terms that the spike protein was a toxin.
Yes, I remember. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that kind of got people wound up. And everything that I said has been validated over time, just the same as with the Rogan podcast. So I then started basically saying yes to just about any podcaster in the world. I interviewed with some very unusual podcasts, including one I'll never forget. was with somebody who was a spiritual medium. So that was an interesting one. I didn't stay on the line too long with that one, but so that was basically saying yes to anybody to try to get the word out.
And then the Rogan interview came sometime after this.
I said these 3 words, and the entire Silicon Valley lost bladder control, which was mass formation psychosis.
What was it?
And mass formation psychosis.
Yes.
And I talked about the history of totalitarianism, using Nazi Germany as an example. And of course, the press attacked me, saying that I was saying that Google and the administration were like Nazi Germany, et cetera. And there was fascinatingly, attacks in the UK press on this, that it was not academic and had no basis. And the people that they were citing were people who were very involved in nudge research, which nudge research is exactly the kind of thing that leads to the mass formation. So the whole thing, I called Matthias Desmet, of course, because it's his theory, and now he has the book out, Psychological Basis for Totalitarianism. And I said to him, Matthias, we're seeing your theories validated in real time. I hope you're capturing all this, because it's going to keep your graduate students busy for decades. It was an amazing time.
Now that book was already published, correct?
No,
Or not yet.
Yeah, it's just come out recently.
And you knew about it because you were his friend.
Yeah, and we had done podcasts together, et cetera. And when I first heard the theory, I knew this explained the kind of hypnosis that so many people, including, unfortunately, so many New Yorkers, have been through, where they are completely caught up in the false narrative that has been promoted to them by the intelligence community and the corporate media.
So give us the name of the book again so that people can follow up. Psychological Basis of Totalitarianism.
Psychology of Totalitarianism, or Psychological Basis of Totalitarianism. And the author is Matthias Desmet, Desmet. You can get it on Amazon.
Now, Doctor, I know you just have a little bit of time, and I want to tell you, hopefully we'll get a chance at another podcast to fill in the blanks that we're missing here, because you're, number one, you are an exceptional scientist with a great background, and the attack on you is scurrilous, and I can't say anything worse about it other than it's a product of the horrible, despotic times we live in. But number two, you do have the gift of explaining things so that us laymen can get it.
I thank you from my heart. I have tried so hard. My wife once said, when we were in the middle of this, that NIH should be paying me because I'm putting thousands of volunteer hours just trying to educate people about the nature of the technology.
This was explainable to any reasonably intelligent person. And there are many, many doctors of your quality, and I'm sure your colleagues who you respect. And that's just not one of their abilities. So where are we now? Now that we have another vaccine coming out, which isn't even going to be, they're not even going to pretend to test it. It looks like mandates are slipping back in. Not the same broad ones, but they're slipping back in. And the old ones haven't been rectified. The people who are fired are fired. Our military is depleted. I know that our police forces are depleted. I can trace for you crimes that would not take place had those cops not been removed. Crimes we can't police, like those break-ins to department stores. You need massive police officers for that. You need 30 or 40 police officers. When your police department has been depleted, you're working on one police officer a car, two police officers a car. They just give up. So what are we looking at here? How do we get back to non-politicized science and non-politicized law enforcement and the country we used to have about 4 years ago or 5 years ago?
Rudy, I'm afraid we're never going to get back there. Um, uh, it's like the veil is off in for many of us that, like me, many of my colleagues actually considered themselves Democrats before all this, kind of center left or not politically aligned, kind of non-aligned people. We weren't really focused on politics. And once the veil is lifted and you see how profoundly information has been manipulated and weaponized, and then you start going back in time and seeing that this has been the case for decades, you can't unsee that. And I'm afraid that, there a case can be made that the reason why I have to be suppressed is because if the people become truly aware of the deep corruption and manipulation that they've been subjected to, it will be profoundly disruptive of our governmental structure. The government will lose its legitimacy. But the thing is, as you know deeply, that's happening anyhow. The legitimacy of the FDA is shot. The CDC is shot. The NIH is shot. Increasingly, the command structure in the DoD legitimacy is shot. And now the FBI legitimacy is shot. How deep does it go? And I don't know how. I'm really perplexed how we can get back to that. Get back to any sort of a structure where, as a country, we can come together in a nonpartisan way and solve our problems and address our real competitor enemies, which, as you have correctly pointed out at the very beginning of this interview series, is the CCP.
No question about it.
And all in the macro scale, if you look from the 40,000 feet down, whether this was intentional CCP manipulation, and a good case can be made that it was. That's why I spoke about Matthew Pottinger. Somehow the CCP has injected a strategy for managing this that has resulted in shutting down the economies of the Western nations. And whether this was an intentional strategy or not, it certainly conveniently supports their geopolitical agenda, as well as that of the central banks and the World Economic Forum. And the globalists with the UN and the World Economic Forum. So that's a whole nother thing we could discuss for another 3 hours.
No, yes, and very important, because, doctor, you're not alone. You're at the tip of the spear, because this is the thing that was the proximate cause. But what's being done to you in your profession and your colleagues is being done to people in political positions who take contrary positions. I understood from the first moment that I obtained the incriminating evidence on Joe Biden, which goes way back to 2017, 2018, that they were going to try to ruin me. I didn't understand how deep, how bad, how widespread. And for the same reason, I would uncover a whole network of criminality that goes way beyond Joe Biden. And they weren't going to let me, and they weren't going to let me survive.
Yep. So we're aligned in a common cause of trying to restore integrity, respect for human dignity, and community.
Well, you do it, and stay safe, and keep focused on the fact that America has faced challenges, maybe not this one, but big ones, and our love of democracy and freedom of each other gets us through. We'll get through it.
Freedom in particular. Remember, we're a republic, not a democracy.
Love you, doctor. You're doing a great job. Great respect. Great respect. And keep going, and we'll be talking very soon.